this gentleman, Nick, should I tell something funny that I thought was really funny? And somebody told me it was really cute or adorable, and I don't think the person was here today, unfortunately. So last year before MAPCON, we had like a bunch of people that were here, like 4, 5, 6 of us, and we went out to dinner the night before MAPCON, and we then after we went to dinner, we went back to my house and we were sitting around the fire pit, and this speaker was just like going on and on about how awesome it was to be in my house and like hanging out, and Annette Bone, who unfortunately isn't here this year, we miss you, Annette. She was like, it's just so adorable that he's like such a fanboy about this, and I thought so too. Like I didn't find it creepy, I didn't find it weird, but I just was like, because I know how that feels, right? Like one of the first, actually the first podcast I ever listened to, WDW Today, I got to go and do events with these people because they would do these giant reunion events, which I like to feel like, and I've been told that this is like a giant reunion event year after year with their MAPCON family. Shout out to Heather and the other people that have said that, and it just reminded me how much I really highly respected and regarded the people that ran that show, that brought all like hundreds of people to Disney World year after year after year to like do different kind of special events and things like that. And that's one of the things that just it helped motivate me not only to get started with podcasting, but to want to do something like this and bring so many awesome people to one place, one room. So thank you, sir, for enabling me to be reminded about fanboyism and that, we're cut from the same cloth. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage, and I'm gonna. He's listening for his last name. That's Nicholas Goberlish. Good, yeah, give it up for Nick. Give it up for Nick.
Goblish. Like goldfish.
Goldfish.
Harry, what happened, man? No intro? No. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
It's a little early.
How's everyone doing today? Good stuff. All right. It's early. Cool. All right. What I wanted to talk about today, and it's interesting for the speakers in here. I don't know if you do the same thing I do. I got the invite last year, or early in the year, in March. And Stephen would probably agree to this, where you're excited, you're like, this is what I'm going to talk about, and you send Joe this is it, this is the title, and then you don't think about it for 5 months, and then suddenly you cram, and you realize that the presentation you're doing now is very different than the one you wanted to do in March. So today I'm going to talk about finding I'm going to move around a lot, so is that cool? Away from the X? Finding your authentic self to find your authentic voice. To kind of tag on Jessica's presentation, everyone here listens to a lot of podcasts, and we hear people talk all the time. And sometimes those conversations are deep, sometimes they're surface level. But what I want to talk about a little bit more about how you share yourself with your audience to let them in so you can get them to continue to listen. And I know there's a real big theme so far today about authenticity. So I started, and this is one thing to Dave Jackson, I did the 8-minute speech last year, and I never mentioned my show because I didn't have time. So I'm going to talk about my show. I started a podcast in January 2015, thought about it a few months before. That's me in 6th grade. One thing my best friend said, I can't believe you're going to put that picture out there. You're really putting it out there, but I thought pretty much we all start somewhere. I think that was my hair. I got my first crew cut, and I just let it grow back in. Didn't know what I was doing. I just took a photograph and thought no one could do my picture better than me, so I thought if I'm going to put myself out there, I might as well show them what I look like. Now that's me today. I've been podcasting for, I learned a little bit about branding. I've been doing this for about 3.5 years, and the reason why I started is prior to me doing my podcast, I'm a parent. Any parents in the room? Kids? Small kids? All right. And I think what happens is, one thing I realized, I started forgetting who I was when I became a parent because my identity was changing. I was an art major in college. I studied radio and video. I found a lot of different ways to express myself. But I decided to create rules that kept me in a box. So my idea was that, my wife, being the mother that she is, she should go out, have a good time, build relationships with her friends. And unfortunately, I was a person that said, you know what, my kids are in college, that's when I'll make friends. I'm fine staying home on Fridays. And I realized I was turning so far into myself that I didn't like myself at work. I didn't like myself. I wasn't making any effort to connect with anybody. And based on some of the things that happened in my past, I made it a habit to, and it took me a long time to admit this, push people away. So it was a lot easier to push people away because without connecting with people, I have no responsibility. When you connect with people and people go through hard times, there's a level of empathy that you have for people, and I realized, well, the only way to protect myself is I just won't make friends. It's not that I didn't have friends, but it became a rule that I said, you know what, it's going to be real easy for me to do that. And I hung out with one friend every other week. I was helping him build his social media brand and his YouTube channel because I had that video and creative background, radio background. And I realized that we did a lot of talking and catching up about life, and I had a lot of stories. And he said, hey, Nick, you have all this equipment. You listen to podcasts. I've listened to podcasts for 12 years. Why don't you do your own podcast, and why don't you share your stories? So I went, bought a $60 USB mic, very different than the equipment I have now. Put it in the middle of the room, and we started telling stories. Bought, it's podcast, Idiot's Guide to Podcasting, right? How many people, I just bought that and taught myself how to do it. And ever since then, I've found a way to build strong relationships and relationships in this room that I consider friends, not just podcasters, but friends that never would have happened if I hadn't turned on a microphone and started telling my story. Now, to do that requires a little bit of things. One is having a conversation. So I haven't told this story in a really long time, but when I was a kid, my mom would talk a lot. Now, picture this, right? It's 1981, right? My mom had 3 friends, Connie, Candy, and Claire. And they would sit at a table at Claire's house and smoke cigarettes. Marlboro Reds nonstop, Marlboro Lights. Just think, a room full of smoke and a bunch of women from Long Island yapping away. And what they would do is they'd make about 5 or 6 boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese, my favorite comfort food, put it in a giant bowl in the middle of the table, and have the kids run in and out of the house, give them a bowl. Whenever they were hungry, they would just serve it up. But ever since I was a kid, I was very observant. I like watching people, especially like a room like this. I love sitting in the back and watching everybody, okay? I learned to listen as I do that too. And I would watch how these adults, my mom and her friends, would talk to each other. Now, I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I'd watch how my mom would say something, Claire would say something, my mom would laugh, and I started to understand just simple dynamic of how people talk to each other, right? No one was on stage, but how the conversation went around, those kind of dead lulls in the conversation. Someone would say something that someone didn't like, and they'd let them know what their point of view was. But it was simply the evolution of understanding how do people talk to each other, okay? And I share that because not until I started having conversations with people on a microphone did I realize that I kind of picked that up when I was a kid. I'm an HR executive by day, so I have conversations with people all the time, but I also have very difficult conversations all the time. So I'm very, very aware how conversations move. It's really weird how that worked out, and how people feel when you have conversations. Now, I just talked about how I learned how people go back and forth, but I had an experience on an airplane that I never realized how amazing it is when you actually connect with someone in a conversation, how much you can share in a conversation. Do you guys ever know when you go somewhere and you meet a total stranger, sometimes you find yourself telling intimate, deepest, darkest secrets? So I was flying for work, I was going to Napa, and it was in the terminal. There was this attractive young lady in the corner. And it's weird, I don't know what it is, but I'll admit this. See somebody like, I wonder where she's sitting. So suddenly when I get on the plane, she's sitting right next to me. So I think her name was Karen, and for the next 6.5 hours, we went from simply talking about where we're from, all the way to the point where when I lost my virginity, right? The first girlfriend I had, like suddenly everything we shared. And the one thing that's amazing thing about when you start sharing things with people, there's an intention of reciprocity. Right? When you share something, suddenly people feel more comfortable and they're more willing to share something with you. Sometimes it doesn't happen though, right? But it's amazing how you share something a little bit, and you, to Jessica's point, you share a little bit and you pull yourself back, right? And it's an experiment. How far can I say something? And then suddenly you find yourself, yeah, I could say anything I want. I could say anything. And then they say anything back. And it's amazing how memorable those conversations become. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, right? I think I talked to her once or twice on Facebook, but I remember what we talked about. I remember what she was a trainer. I remember what she did for a living. I remember where we sat on the plane. But just because I felt free that I was sharing something, oops, I went too far. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with that. I was able to share many things with her, and she was sharing it back when I thought, wow, number one, I felt so free, and so I had no inhibitions in what I was sharing. But I felt I was capturing something in that moment. But has anybody experienced that before? Anybody experienced that here? I mean, I had some conversations with people yesterday that I was sharing a few things. It was a late night. Now, when I talk about, again, having conversations and being able to share things, I think there's a level of relating to people that share things that you have something in common with. My son's 10 years old, and I think he's old enough to watch action movies with his dad. So the other day I watched Commando. Any of you guys watch Commando? Right? Giant hulking Arnold Schwarzenegger. Man, I just remember how old that movie is now that I say it out loud. How hulking Schwarzenegger was. He starts the movie off, he's got a giant log on his arm, right? He's carrying a tree he just cut down, he's not sweating at all. And in the entire movie, the guy only gets shot once, but he ends up shooting 280 people, no one can hit him. No one can hit him. And then how many people in the movie have seen Die Hard? Die Hard, right? Okay, cool, right? Some people, listen, I said Commando and you're like, meh. I say Die Hard, you're like, yeah. Now why? What's so appealing about John McClane versus John Matrix? He's an everyman, right? He's a guy that is vulnerable. He's a guy that there's moments in that movie where he shares how he feels. He says things, he talks about his wife, the relationship with his wife. You know, I know that John Matrix is a single father, but we don't hear anything about, I mean, there's a relationship with his daughter, Alyssa Milano, but there's nothing in there that he talks about that, right? But you're drawn to John McClane. That's why they're still making movies. Well, actually, I think they jumped the shark because now he's getting more like Commando anyway, because he's untouchable and everything wrong happens to the same guy all the time. But I think there's a way that you can truly connect with your audience if you become more of an every person by sharing a little bit more about who you are versus simply sticking to the surface. If you look at Commando, it's all surface, right? What that environment, how many movies did they make where it was just, he was the guy, the tough guy all the time? Not till he made Kindergarten Cop was the one where we were like, oh, he's actually funny. He actually has a sense of humor. And I think what that requires, and it's the one thing I'm leaving you guys with today, is a word called self-disclosure. And I put the whole definition up there because I really wanted to read it. Self-disclosure is a process of communication by which one person reveals information about him or herself to another. You're sitting next to somebody on a plane, you're meeting with someone at a podcast conference. The information can be descriptive or evaluative. It can include thoughts, feelings, aspirations, goals, failures, successes, fears is a big one, and dreams, as well as one's likes, dislikes, and favorites. Okay? I believe self-disclosure is an amazing way if you're stuck in simply dealing with the surface on your podcast, whether or not you're interviewing someone, whether or not you, deep inside, you want to say something in a conversation, but this requires effort to do, okay? Again, sitting next to somebody on a plane for 6.5 hours, that wasn't easy to start that conversation, but it's amazing how it steamrolled into something pretty amazing when we started having that conversation. And that's happened. My podcasts are, I don't call them guests, I call them co-hosts. They even have their own Facebook page, which is cool too, that community. My co-hosts are just like me. I'm no better, no worse than them. They have their ideas, I have my ideas. We pick one topic and we share stories and experiences over 200 episodes. But it's important that they know that it's comfortable for them to share something just as much as it's comfortable for me to share something. But sometimes it's not that easy because sometimes I've had people in this room or people that have been at this conference that have done their own podcasts that I've had to pull things out of them and probe, find more ideas and thoughts and feelings. They might tap on something and say, what do you mean by that? Elaborate a little bit more. Interrupt them in a conversation. Like, wait, you just tapped on something that I really want to dive into. And I think sometimes some of my co-hosts feel different after the episode. Those are my favorite shows. The ones either I'm thinking differently or they're thinking different because someone had the courage to share something. I try to get a visual to really give you an idea. Everyone in this room has a story, okay? I shared a little bit about mine. If you listen to my show, it's pretty much my whole story. There is way more of you in this room than the content you produce. And your content will change. How many of you listen to a podcaster that no matter what they'll do, you'll listen? Because you know them. They've shared something, you go, wow, that's actually happened to me before. Oh, it's funny, I dealt with that yesterday. That small anecdotal thing that they say, or that insecurity that they share. The content is always, there's one podcaster I followed for 15 years. He's done 3 different podcasts for 3 different subjects, and I can't stop listening to him. I want to meet him. He's from Long Island. He's 10 years younger than me. He's a cool guy. I know Chris. I want to introduce him to your podcast because he likes history. See, I know all that about him. He likes history, and he's from Long Island. I can't wait to send that to him. But there is so much of this that I think you all should tap into simply by using a moment of self-disclosure, okay? Now, I'm not talking about dumping your entire life story into one episode, right? But if you're afraid of something, share it. Scary. If you like something a lot, share it. If you're passionate about politics and you're afraid someone's going to judge you for it, so what? Share it. Who cares? But you have to figure out, 1, what you're comfortable sharing, and 2, when's the right moment. When I said I went back and forth with my mom watching these conversations, there was, okay, she said something and then that you laughed and it was weird, a 4 or 5-year-old watching 2 people have a conversation. But it gave me a better understanding about how the dynamic of the conversation works, the surface. There are moments on my show that people, myself or my co-host, share things that takes the show in a different direction. And I don't start my show by saying this is where it's going to end up, but as a podcast producer, you're pretty much in the next half an hour to 30 minutes to 60 minutes, I pretty much know what I want to leave my mark. And I look at my shows as leaving a mark on the world. Everyone does that. You leave your podcast in perpetuity. It's not going to go away. I mean, I think Dave Jackson and I were talking yesterday about a podcast. We looked for it. It's out there somewhere. But you have to truthfully share yourself with your audience. But here's the thing. It all starts with self-disclosure, but it's risky. There's been times when I've shared things on my show, and I've had my wife on my show, I've had family on my show, where I'm like, yikes, whoops. Maybe once or twice I decided, that's the best thing about being a podcaster. When I had a conversation with the woman sitting next to me on the plane, I couldn't take back anything I said. Nothing. I said a lot of things, and I think all the cards were on the table. So I think we shared everything in that 6.5 hours. But it's risky because once you say something in real life, you can't take it back. When you're with a co-host or you're producing a podcast, the best thing about it is you can just edit it out. I was thinking, when I put that slide together, I thought, well, yeah, that's the best parachute. Maybe, because this is an experiment too. I know there's people in this room that are hearing this and understanding this, but you've never done this before on your show, because you may have qualms about saying, well, no one cares about that, or no one cares about how I feel. I just want to get my content out, do my interview, and that's it. But I think the only way to get people to continue to follow you and connect with you, because I have a really tight network of people that I know, listeners that I know, like to Jessica's point, most of my listeners become friends, and hence the whole idea of my show. It's not about being fanboys. I know, Joe, yes, I am a fanboy, but Joe, I stopped listening to your show, and now I just like talking to you. So, now I feel more of a friend than a fanboy. But there are certain things that people have shared on my show that have taken the show in a different direction. Oh, thanks, Joe. Now, I just want to share some of those with you. Now, this is either something that I said on my show or something that my co-host said on my show. And everything drew a story that required both of us to disclose a little bit more about how we felt and what we shared with ourselves that made the show a lot more memorable and created a better relationship and connection on the show. Again, that part where on the glacier, it's not so much what's up top, because the topic's the topic, but what happens during the show, it's that part of you. So one person on my show, we were talking about, I usually sometimes ask, what are you afraid of? They said, I have a phobia of pigeons. Now it's simple, but 5 minutes? Nice, cool. It's better than 8 minutes, like last time. So I have a phobia of pigeons. Very simple, but it took the conversation in a different direction. This was actually said by a woman I went to high school with, okay? The show ended up going through about high school, about what we're being judged, of things we wouldn't share. We would be hesitant to share with somebody. She was in the popular group, and I was kind of on the nerd group. You remember my picture? That sixth grader wasn't really in the popular group. He wasn't the prom king. I had my wife on the show once. I've known my wife for 20 years. I had a co-host, actually the same person that said the pigeon piece. She canceled. Her kids got sick. And I had my wife on the show, and it's one of the most amazing shows I've ever done with my wife. For someone I've known for so long, actually admitted that she was terribly afraid of her mother when she was a kid. Now, I love my mother-in-law. I danced with my mother-in-law at my wedding. She's awesome. But I cannot believe my wife, knowing the relationship she had, was terrified of her mom. And it led to one of the coolest conversations that I've ever had with my wife, because I had no idea I had no idea. My wife's very guarded, had no idea that that happened. It redefined the relationship I see that my wife has with her mom. I almost killed someone with a cigarette. I was out to dinner with a friend of mine, a guy who helped me start my show. We were both raised by alcoholic dads, spent a lot of weekends at bars. We played in the parking lot. That was a very weird thing. I said, you know, I'd out there, we'd kick stones and throw stones. He said, yeah, one time I picked up a cigarette, I threw it in the window box of the building, the leaves caught fire, filled the basement up with smoke, and they carried somebody out and they nearly died. Now, my friend's a nice guy, but he said he never told anybody that story other than his mother. In some way, shape, or form, he was able to share it on my show. And he's a really nice guy. And I love the tagline, like, my friend almost killed somebody. I think I almost killed somebody. My dog killed the neighbor's cat. Okay? This was something where we didn't want to tell anyone. A cat unfortunately came into my yard. My dog was a rescue, killed it. And my dog has killed many animals in the backyard. But the amount of judgment, I know a lot of cat people and my neighbor, but this took a very long time. I knew I had to tell the story because that's what my podcast is about. But once I had admitted this, it was weird. I felt like something was lifted off my shoulders. But now every time we talk about my dog, we talk about how great he is, but actually he's a deadly animal. I was voted nicest guy in high school, but no girls wanted to sleep with me. That's the truth. I never understood that. Nice guys do finish last. But in most of my conversations, admitting a little bit about myself, that's something, again, this isn't something I just share with a co-host. This is something I share with the world. Okay? I spent a night in jail for driving drunk a block away from a bar I worked at. It's my sister. And that's one thing I thought it was an amazing story. My twin sister, unfortunately that happened, but we had her on my show on her 40th birthday about how she decided she chose Labor Day weekend to spend a night in jail. It was one of the most depressing stories I've ever heard, but one of the most insightful at the same time, and I captured it on my podcast. I don't want to turn out like my father. This took me a very, very long time to do. My relationship with my dad, it's really non-existent, but I had this conversation with other people, but this is something I disclosed that led to a lot of self-affirmations as I did my podcast. There's a lot of people that don't have really strong relationships with their parents, and until I did this, my community actually came out. Not only do they empathize with me, but I've had people on my show to share those same experiences too. My best friend from high school dumped me when I met my wife. You guys ever have that experience before? A guy I thought was my brother dumped me the moment I started dating my wife. Right now, truth, I'm wearing a t-shirt that is keeping me from sweating through this dress shirt. I thought I'd share something now, a $35 t-shirt I'm wearing. And then the one thing I really shared when I started my podcast is I think I push people away to protect myself. When I shared this with my wife, it was a very difficult thing to say. I'm a people person, but I prefer sometimes to be alone. I didn't realize I was my own worst enemy. So sharing this with the world and actually put it on my show and disclosing this allowed me to be more free, allowed me to share things a little bit more, and allowed my audience and my co-host to know that I'm vulnerable. You know, to the point, Joe, you put your pants on just like me. But sometimes when we do this, we're performers, and sometimes people get an aura around us. But it's easy to say, well, they're too important, or I'll never connect with them. But until you actually share something with somebody and realize, wait, I have that same situation too. I understand that. Let me listen to that person a little bit more because they might share something else that I can connect with. When you share a bit of yourself with your audience, you'll find your authentic self. I've been told I have an interesting podcast, right? It's a 200-episode podcast, I say, about making connections, looking back while moving forward. It's really, pick a topic, we share stories, and hopefully we grow from that. It's 200 episodes. I don't listen to them. I'll listen to them when I'm done, and then I'll write a book. That's what I'm going to do. Okay? But it's something that I hear all the time, that I'm authentic. What you see now here, I was nervous when I started. I feel a little bit more comfortable now. But I'm who I am. I'm not going to pretend to be anybody else. It's very easy to do that, but I think once you start sharing and allowing people into you, you'll become more of an authentic individual. Not say you're not, but you will sound authentic. And people want to continue to listen to people that they feel that they're authentic. And all right, dude. And once you do that, the voice that you share with your audience will be something that is authentic. And no matter what content you put out, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, no matter what it is, people will tune into you, not just your content. Because content will change, your interests will change, but you won't. Cool? So try that next time. Just share one thing. Joe, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk today. Cool?
Thank you.
And you guys can... And I'm everywhere where everybody else is. Cool. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
You know, it's give it up for Nick. You know, it's funny you were saying about putting your pants on. I was putting my pants on this morning on a slippery bathroom floor, and I kept thinking to myself, man, I really hope I don't slip, fall, and hit my head, and then not be here for this. So it's just some of us do it a little more dangerously than others.